Hello. I wanted to also acknowledge the important work of the Native urban community in Chicago. I used to live here and work with Women of All Red Nations, and there's such a long history of great organizing. We were one of the first groups to organize around violence against Native women. There was the movement to end the Chief-Alaniwik mascot, to close Indian burial remains, to be in support of the Chippewa spearfishers when they were getting mobbed with racist signs saying, save a fish, spear a pregnant squaw. So this is like a key, I think, area of great Native organizing that I think is important for everybody to get to know and connect with. Anyway, my job today is to kind of talk about people of color organizing and what might Jesus have to say about it. Well, in my experience, having done decades of it, people of color organizing starts out sounding pretty good. You've been hanging around with too many white people in these white organizations. You're like, I'm tired of these white supremacist shenanigans, so I'm done with that. I'm going to hang out with other people of color, and we're going to get along great. This lasts for all of about 5 seconds before you're in a complete smackdown. And you're saying, I'm never going to work with these people again. I'm just screw everybody else. We're just going to work with our group. That doesn't even work out either, but that's a whole other story. So it turns out Jesus had a similar problem happening with him, right? Jesus is a colonized person working under the conditions of empire, working with the most marginalized people, and is declaring a different kind of way that we could live together, right? In Matthew 23, he says, but you are not to be called rabbi, for you have one teacher, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called instructors, for you have one instructor, the Messiah. The greatest among you will be your servant. Right, so he's not just challenging the logics of colonial domination, but also hierarchy even within colonized groups, saying that we need to live in a more egalitarian way with each other. But what happens to Jesus is that he's not just the victim of colonizers, right? His own disciples do him in. His own people of color he was working in solidarity with are the ones who betrayed him and denied him. But what happens after the resurrection? Does he say, disciples, you're a bunch of jackasses, I never want to see you again? No. He says, peace be with you, go forth and end global oppression. Or that's how I interpret it. So what Jesus tells us about people of color organizing is that it is fundamentally a story of betrayal. But if we look at it, this betrayal through a gospel lens, the betrayal can be the beginning of the story rather than the end of the story. So why was the betrayal not the end of the story? First, Jesus anticipated betrayal, right? Jesus knew he was going to be betrayed. And we ourselves should know that we will always be betrayed in these circles. And it's not because we're particularly terrible people, but we have been set up by the logics of white supremacy to betray each other. We are not oppressed in the same way. White supremacy operates under different kinds of logics. We have the logics of anti-black racism that say it's not just that we should aspire to whiteness, but we should always avoid blackness, even within communities of color. Right? We have the logics of genocide that say Native peoples are nature to be discovered. They are not peoples that can have land. So anybody has the right to indigenous land. It's Native people's job to disappear. We have the logics of war and militarism that say some people are permanent enemies to the well-being of empire, and we must always be at war with them. Or to quote Sora Han, instead of thinking of the U.S. as being at war, we should think of the United States as war. So, if we look, for instance, in a Native context, it's not an accident, for instance, that we have anti-black racism, because this is how it was set up. If we look in the State versus Belmont decision, the argument for how Native peoples could assert any kind of rights, right, it was that they had to prove, quote, that their blood was not mixed with that of African or Negro races. So basically, legally, indigeneity in the U.S. is defined as anti-blackness. Right? So is is anti-blackness? No, it was set up that way. It was set up to have that antagonism. When you have all the resources taken away from native lands, is it a surprise that native peoples have to join the military and fight Orientalist wars abroad just to survive? But no, it's set up for that to be the case. And so what we learned in that particular case is that we should expect betrayal. We should not expect that we are friends, and that if we want to be friends, it's going to be a conscious theological and political project to do so. Right? We're going to have to make that effort. We're going to have to learn from each other. We're going to have to unlearn everything, not only that we know about each other, but we know about ourselves, to create a different kind of possibility. And how can that be? I think Jesus points to another possibility, is that when we think of what does organizing look like and who are the people who can do the organizing, in Luke 5:30-32, it says, the Pharisees and their scribes were complaining to his disciples, saying, why do you eat and drink with tax collectors and sinners? And Jesus answered, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick I have come to call, not the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So Jesus hung around not the most cool, awesome people. He did not hang around the woke, right? He hung around the sinners who needed frequent power naps. Right? So what this speaks to us is that rather than having a politics based on the right people, or churches around the right people, can we bring churches that make us become better people? Therefore, again, we're not disappointed in each other. We expect it, but we create structures that can make us be better and that we can start to practice with each other differently. So this suggests a different model of organizing also that's based less around God being on the side of the oppressed and God being on the side against oppression. Because we recognize that being oppressed doesn't make you a better person, right? It just makes you oppressed. Being oppressed doesn't make you immune from oppressing other peoples. But in some ways that should be a relief to us, because how often do we hear, well, we can't work on police brutality because there's black on black crime, and we can't worry about immigration detention because an immigrant might have committed a crime at some point, and we can't deal with native sovereignty because native peoples are drinking. Like, it does not matter. You don't have to earn justice. That's right. But then similarly, that should then inform how we act with others. Even when we feel betrayed, even when we feel others don't have our back, we should have their backs. Right? Because ultimately, other people's oppression keeps our oppression alive as well. Right? We will never end settler colonialism without ending anti-blackness. We will never end indigenous genocide without ending militarism. We will never end indigenous conquest without ending the reinforcements of militarized borders. All these things keep our oppression in place. So I just want to briefly mention some of the efforts Native peoples have been doing to think outside these things. For instance, when the war in Iraq started, a group organized against the war, and this was what they said. All peoples and beings are related to us, so we are being asked to make war against our relatives. We believe in the great circle of life, and what we are doing to the Iraqi people is what the U.S. did to our ancestors. The U.S. has mistreated us in the past and the present, and it has conscripted our minds and hearts so that we are participating in the oppressive behavior towards another race of humans. Another example was Native peoples organizing around immigration issues. In Arizona, Native peoples took over a border patrol office when SB 1070 was passed and said, on this day, people who are indigenous to Arizona join with migrants who are indigenous to other parts of the Western Hemisphere, demanding a return to the traditional indigenous value of freedom of movement for all peoples. Border security is ultimately about regulating indigenous lands to ensure the capital exportation of peoples and resources. It must be clear that the immigration struggle is also an indigenous struggle. And finally, we see increased more work of Native peoples organizing in support of Black Lives Matter, and also critiquing our history sometimes of using or engaging in the language, the symbols, the strategies of Black justice movements without them being in solidarity with Black peoples. So that black struggle becomes an empty signifier to support our struggle without us being in solidarity with black struggle. So Talahuka InfoShop made this critique when he said, we need to rethink our using the term Native Lives Matter. Because sure, we have suffered from police violence, but we don't need to co-opt another struggle to be in solidarity with it. Right? We can engage in Native justice now and also work for Native peoples to support Black Lives Matter so that we can actually have a joint struggle that recognizes our mutual interest in supporting a struggle against police violence. So to conclude, the best way that we can be friends with each other is to presume that we are enemies. And then when we presume that, right, betrayal might be the beginning, but it will not be the end. Because then we can then work together to imagine how we ourselves can be different with each other and create a different possibility.